The average result of question 1A was 63%, so quite a way above the exam average of 49. And what we were asked to do was record the 3 documents we were given in addition to the journals that we were also given. And it says, can we enter these in the general journal provided? So the first one, we see the name of our business, which is Party Time at the top. We're issuing a credit note to a customer called LCAP, so that will be a sales return. The second one referenced a stock take being different to the total on the stock card, so that'll be a stock adjustment. And the last one was a memo saying we actually owe some wages to employees, so that will be an accrued expense. So we're going to enter all 3 in the general journal. Now what's important is that the question here actually said, can you enter them in the general journal? But if it didn't say that and it gave us a few different journals, it's important to know where each transaction would go, and we don't want to rely on the question telling us which journal to enter items in. Looking at the first one, so that was the credit note. So what we need to remember is that when we're the one issuing the credit or a sales return, there's actually 6 things we need to do. So there's 4 things related to the sale price. We want to debit sales returns to offset the revenues. So we're just using some made up amounts here to demonstrate the point. These aren't the amounts for this question. We want to debit GST to offset the fact that we did a credit to GST when we made the sale. The debtor will owe us less money, which will be the total of those 2 numbers, and then we'll also offset their subsidiary account. What makes this a little trickier is the fact that we also need to undo the cost of sales, so that's where the last 2 entries come in. So in this case, the customer's bringing stock back, so we have a debit to stock control going up. And we did have a sale, so what we need to do is undo the cost of sales. So we'll do a credit to the cost of sales account. So for getting this document and the amounts in it, what's important is that you can remember the 6 entries required, and then all we need to do on the question is insert the different amounts that we're given. So looking at this question, we'll do a debit to sales return of $1,800 plus the GST of $180, and then we offset that with a credit to debtors control. And then we also do the same to the debtor subsidiary account for LCAP. Then we did that was our 2 entries were a debit to stock control, but the problem here is we actually don't have the amount. We've got the sale amount in that document, we don't have the actual cost of the sale. So what's important here is to make sure we've read the question in the facts of the case at the start. And what we were told that all stock is marked up 100% on cost. So what that implies is if this sale was $1,800, then the cost of sale must be $900, and then we'll also credit cost of sales by $900 as well. The second document was the memo regarding the stock take. So we can see we've got $48,100 in the stock card, yet we go into a stock take and there's $48,400 physically counted. So just doing the basic maths there, we can see we've got a very small stock gain of $300. And that seems to be the logical answer, and yet if we look at the actual examiner's report, that's not the answer. So what we want to do is look at why, and that's because just previously, the first entry we did a sales return, and we actually did a debit to stock control of $900. Now, this hadn't been recorded when this stock take was done. So what we need to remember is that this stock card that says $48,100 now actually needs to have another $900 put into it. So really, there's not $48,100 in the stock card, there's $49,000 in the stock card. So what we've got now is if we're only going to count $48,400, we actually have a stock loss. We're missing $600 of stock. So that's what made this question so difficult. We had to take information from the previous question and apply it to this one. So the general journal entry is quite straightforward once we've got the amount, but we'll do a debit to stock loss and a credit to stock control of $600. The third document was a memo for the wages owing. So we have an accrued expense of $2,100. So what's important to realize that this is 2 things. Firstly, the $2,100 is an expense. There's wages that are being consumed. It's going to increase a liability called accrued wages and therefore decrease owner's equity. And we also have a liability. There's an obligation to pay the employee's wages. There's a past event when the employees provided their labour. And there'll be a future outflow of economic benefits when we pay the wages. So we need to do 2 entries. We always, on these adjustments, debit the expense, $2,100. And in this case, we're going to create a liability called accrued wages of $2,100. Looking at the total marks, there were 7 marks for this question. So for the first entry, we had 1 mark for the dual entry of the sales return and GST entries, 1 mark for getting both the debtors control and the debtor subsidiary ledger, and then 1 mark combined for the stock control and cost of sales entry. For the stock loss, we had one entry for the debit to stock loss and then one entry to the credit to stock control. And therefore that gave a lot of students who did have trouble getting the amount right, it did give them a chance to get one carry forward mark, given that the entry for the stock control account is dependent on what you did for the first entry. And lastly, we had a debit to wages for 1 mark and a credit to accrued wages for 1, and that's our total of 7 marks. Looking at the mark breakdown, we can see 8% of kids got 0, and going forward, 43% of kids got 6 out of 7. So a lot of people did very, very well on this question, but very few people actually got the full 7 marks, only 2%. And I personally would think that would be to do with the stock loss amount, which required you to sort of apply a little bit of extra information. The average was 4.4, as you can see there. And the examiner's comments were, despite debiting the stock control account with the $900 in the first entry, many students failed to realise that this entry actually has an adjustment on the stock loss, and that's the key issue for this question. Therefore, many responses, you had a stock gain of 300 rather than the correct entry, which is actually a stock loss of 600. Another common error was to reverse the last double entry. So where the accrued wages were reversed, we did a credit to wages and a debit to accrued wages, which is incorrect.